Hi, and welcome to the support series videos from Vectra. In this series, engineers will go through some of the common requests we see from customers and how to resolve them. Please be sure to subscribe and check back for new videos in the series.
Welcome to Vectra Support Series. I'm Mohammed Pasha from Vectra Support Team. In today's video, we'll see how we can use the freely available Postman tool to perform API queries on Vectra. There are a few API versions available, and in this session, we'll be using the API version 2.5. Let us now launch Postman. The very first thing that I would like to do is change the theme from light theme to dark theme. To do that, I'm going to go to settings, themes, dark theme. Let us now take a quick look into the API version 2.5 documentation. To get the documentation, you can go to support.vectra.ai/s and then search with the keyword API. And once the search is completed, you'd get the various results or various REST API documents that are available. And if you see, so there are quite a few of them in the sense, if you look at this, so you got version 2.2, version 3.0, 3.1 for SaaS, right? And then you got 2.4. And you may have a question or wondering, why am I using version 2.5 specifically in this session, wherein we have versions like such as 3.1, 3.2, and even 3.3, right? The only reason is that I already have the setup done with the version 2.5 before starting this video presentation. Also note that the difference between these versions is mainly accommodating new features that are released in the latest version. So there's no much big difference in terms of the documentation. It's just the new features get added and the API documentation just gets updated. So here is where I have launched the version 2.5 documentation. And so let's just take a quick look. So as I scroll down, so you can see how do we access this API, right? So accessing any API version is pretty simple. So you got to go to HTTPS and then give the Vectra management API, management IP address or FQDN of your Vector brain, followed by /API, followed by the version that you're going to go ahead and use to query, and then the path. Now, when it comes to the path, so you have various paths that you can run the API queries on, right? So you got /rules. Basically, this would triage, give you the triage rule configuration. Then you got /detections, right? So it would give security detection events, right? And then what are the methods that are used, right? So you can see we have get, post, put, delete in this, whereas on detection it's just get and patch. Now similarly, we have got /health and /lockdown. And the other thing that I want to mention is, so in this particular session we'll be looking at the mainly focusing at just the /health, just to give you an heads up about that. So if I search for health itself, now one key point that I need to highlight is this one, right? So where it says that please note that the health API requires the view health permissions. So any user who is making a query to the /health path, so he needs to have view health permission as part of his role defined in order for him to make queries to this particular endpoint of the API. Now let's come back to Postman, right? So once you launch Postman, you'd get something like this, right? It's pretty simple to start. So you can simply start querying the APIs by just clicking on that add button, and then any method that you are supposed to do based on the documentation. And if you want to query a specific endpoint, let's say something like maybe vectra.com, right? So this is just to show you. I don't think this is going to give any results here. And then you can simply click on send, right? So once you have any endpoint or for that matter, right, and then you can perform the query. I mean, you would get a response pretty much here. Now within this request, right, so you can see that we have got options to select different methods. Back at the documentation that we saw earlier, right, so we have got quite a few methods that we can use for different API endpoints, right? So if I go back here, so as you can see, right, yeah, here, so there are various methods that we can use, and so we can do the same thing here. Then we have things like parameters. If you want to give some parameters, so you can add it here. And then if you have any sort of authorization that you want to do, you can do it under this. And then headers, right? So if you take a look at headers, so if I do this, right, so if you see there are 7 headers that are actually hidden. So these headers are added by default. Now, if you remember, I just entered this. I didn't have to add any headers there. And then if I want to see what are those hidden headers, I can just click on that, and then I can see that these are the hidden headers that are by default added. And then accordingly, if you want to submit a body in that request, so then you can select on that and then fill in these, right? So you can select whichever is needed. And now what we can do is we can have something called as a collection. So I'll just speak about the collection in a few minutes. But what we can do is, collection is nothing but it's a collection of various requests, right? So you can group requests into a single collection. So what you can do is you can add this particular request as part of a single collection. And to do that, all you have to do is click on save as. And then if you see, I mean, currently if you see, I already have a couple of collections here, right? So Vectra health and Vectra detection. So what I can do is I can either add to this existing detection, or what I can do is add to a new collection, right? By going here, clicking on new collection, and then let's say test collection, and then I can say create, right? And then I can click on save. Now once I do that, so that gets added. And one if I click on collections here, so you could see that, what I was speaking about. Under this collection, you have a collection named test, and under that test there is that request. We can actually give a name to this request. Let's say, for example, test request, right? So I can just enter that over here, so this gets changed as test. And then you can see that request. And then if you make any sort of changes, for example, let's say I delete the M there. So you can see that if it is unsaved request, so you would see an orange dot there, which clearly indicates that it's not saved. All you have to do is click save, and then that gets turned off, and that means that it's a saved query. Let's now jump to our collection Vectra health. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that, and I'll pick the very first request under the Vectra health collection. I'm going to close off this one, and I'll just, so there's something that's here, right? So you can see something called as base URL there, and then I'm going to go ahead and hit send. Now when I do that, so this is actually the request that is reaching to the Vectra brain, right? So if you see that it reaches to the Vectra brain and pulls all the required information here, right? As in, what is the status of the disk, CPU statuses, network statuses, right? Are there any interfaces that are receiving traffic, and things like that, information about sensors, memory, and so on and so. So what is this base URL, right? So if I hover over that base URL, you can see that it gives it highlights an initial and a current value. And so what is this base URL specifically doing here? Base URL is nothing but it's a variable, and that's how Postman indicates a variable, right? So the variable is in dual curly braces. And where do I set this variable? So when it comes to variables, there are different variables. So there are global variables, local variables, collection variables, and then environment variables. We'll just talk about collection variables and environment variables in this video. So what is where is this base URL defined, right? So where is this variable defined? So if I go to the collection itself, Vectra health, and then go under variables, so as you can see, what I've done is I've defined a variable named base URL, and then what I've done is I've just went ahead and gave an initial value. It can be anything, and then the current value, which is, so if you see that it just goes and picks up the slash health under that, right? And so that's what gets substituted in the actual request itself. And then when I run that, so this becomes this, and then the current value becomes slash health slash, right? So basically that's what the base URL is. Now what is the benefit of this, right? So let's say I have to make another request. So here I have got another request under the same collection, and now I want to go to a different path. I don't want to go to the slash health, right? So what I can do is I can do a base URL, and then I can do slash health, right? And I think one thing that I can do here is, instead of having the slash health, yeah. So why am I doing that, right? So if you see, there is a slash health, and then there is a slash network. So what this become? Why is this being done, right? So if I go back to the documentation here, and if you can see here, right? So under the slash health, I've got various elements, right? So there are again various elements for health. If you see, I've got network element, system element, memory element. Now, when I earlier ran just with this query, I got all of these listed, right? So I got all of those Yeah. So basically, I got the outputs for all of this. Now, if I want to just get some information about the network or the system, right? So what is the system serial number, uptime, and version, and things like that. So all I have to do is to just go here, and let me go back to the Postman. So I just need to, because my base URL is this, which is the IP address of the Brain API version 2.5/health. All I have to do is I have to just call the base URL, give a slash network, and then when I run this, so instead of getting the all the elements of the system health, I'll now only get the network element. So if you see, this is the on, only this much is the output, right? So similarly, so let's add request to this health, right? And I'm gonna make it as, let's say, system. And now all I have to do is I can just hit dual curly braces, and then I can click on this, right? So now I've got the base URL, so which is including the health, and I'm going to go ahead and do call the system, right? So this one, system, and then I can hit save, so it gets saved. And if you notice that, whatever I change here, so it will automatically get reflected there. So I'm going to correct the spelling there, so I'll just make that as system. So if you can see the system now, when I'm going to go ahead and run, so I'll just get the output for system. So Vectra needs authorization token or authorization API key to be provided as part of the header of a request in order for this to work. Now, if you see the difference between my test here, right? So you can see that I've got only 7 headers here, and there are only 7 headers which are hidden. And then, whereas if you look at any of these, right? So you can see there are 8 headers, and the reason being is I am passing authorization, the API key, as part of the headers. And how am I doing it, right? So the very first thing is we need to get the key, right? Now, where do we get the key? So to get the key, you can actually go to your UI, go to my profile and click on view API token, and then it's going to go ahead and ask for the password. All right, when I do continue, I'm gonna just go ahead and wait. It's a bit slow. Yeah, so now you can see that there's the key that gets generated, and I can simply copy that key and then use that key and add it wherever I want, right? So in this particular scenario, authorization is set as inherit. So there are various way you can authorize. You can set as inherit authorization from parent, no auth, API key, right? So all I have to do is go ahead and click on API key and then set that, right? So what so what happens is, what is much easier, right? So easier is to go to the collection and then do the same thing, authorization. And if you see, what I've done is I've set the authorization as API key here. The key is authorization. Now, how do I know that I need to give this as key? So again, let's go back and refer to the documentation, right? Now, if you see, we need to give something as an authorization token followed by that API token that we get from the UI, right? And if you see, that's what I've done here. The thing is, again, in order to define that value, I'm using a variable here, so which is called as auth underscore token. But interestingly, if you see the difference between this variable and let's say if I go to the base URL variable, right? So in the base URL, as you can see, there are two things that we have to notice. A, there is a C here, right? C stands for collection, right? So what this is telling is, this is basically a variable that's a collection variable. And then the other thing is, if you look at the initial and current value, they are clear text. I know what it is. Whereas when I go to the Vectra Health collection itself, where I'm defining this authorization key, now what has happened is, if I hover over it, A, it is E, indicating it's an environment variable, not a collection variable. B, it's not visible, right? So it's basically it's not visible when I hover over it. And so if you see, so basically what has happened is, what I've done is I've defined this auth token in something called as an environment. Now when I click on environment, you can see that I've got a global environment and I've got a Vectra environment. And within this Vectra environment, when I click on this Vectra environment, you can see that what I've done is I've defined a variable called auth token. When I do a default, this value will be clear text, so anybody can see that. Whereas when I do a secret, so basically the value gets hidden. And that is the reason. So what has happened is, I've defined this particular variable here, right? And I'm just calling that variable as part of the authorization for my collection Vectra health. And then what I'm doing is, this is the parent, and then in individual request, all I'm saying is, rather than me going and defining every time, I'm just saying that inherit this authentication authorization from the parent. So if you see, all I have to do is the same thing, right? So even in the system, it, because by default it picks up that one, I don't need to go ahead and manually change or add the API key for individual requests. So with that, so the authorization is automatically provided behind the scenes, gets added automatically because we have defined it in such a manner. So what is difference between a collection variable versus an environment? I want to go ahead and add a new request to this collection, right? So what I'll do is, let me add a request, right? Now, if you see, when I try to access the collection variable base URL, it doesn't allow me to do that, even though it's there. So if you see that, it's so there's the difference, right? So it's like it gets highlighted there saying that, unresolvable variable, because that is not available under this collection. It's only available for this. Whereas if I instead go ahead and do something like auth token, you can see it even gives a pop-up there, right? I can simply select that and it automatically resolves that, and it's available for everybody running in that environment, right? So which is basically the vector environment that I have created in this. So that is the difference between the environment variable and basically the collection variable. And I think that's about it in this video. Hope that this video has been informative, and wish you a great day. Thank you.